Hello, my friends. I hope you're having a fantastic week. Thank you ever so much for coming back and joining me once again. This week, I'm interviewing a lady called Jo. Now, Jo mostly works with men on their mindset to create more abundance in their lives, whatever that may mean for them. And it's a great conversation, all about how you can grow your business. We also got into her story a little bit as well. And I think it'll be really valuable considering where we are with the economy and people being concerned, of course, about the future of where their business is and how to market themselves and how to get themselves out there a little bit more. So hope you take value from this episode, and I'll see you in just a moment after Jo's explained a little bit more about what she does.
So I'm Jo Renshaw. I'm a life coach. I work predominantly with men, and I help men to overcome problems that they may have in their life. Many men come to me wanting to make more money in their business. And as we're working on that goal, we might discover a story that they've been telling themselves about their life that perhaps they borrowed from a parent or a teacher that was at one time useful for them and is now no longer serving them. So we become aware of that story and see how it's playing out in the results that they're getting today, and then find a new story that feels better and that serves them towards the results that they do want. So an example I can give is a client was telling me that he had heard from his father that nothing he did was ever good enough. And now in his 50s, that story was making him work really hard and making him work hard in a way that wasn't productive and that didn't feel good or fulfilling to him. So we worked on changing that story to him knowing that whatever he did, it was more than enough, and that whatever he brought to his life was of value. And it was such a thrill for me as his coach to see him suddenly just making money like water flowing into his life. So that's just an example of a result that I can have.
It's fantastic. And firstly, thank you for the time, Jo, because time is of the essence, and everyone has lots of things to do. So I appreciate the time always. But I think for me, as we discussed a little bit before the show, I think there's so much that business owners, especially coming out into the market that we're in at the moment, where they could be overwhelmed, they could be like really concerned because it's like, look, it's going to be a difficult market, etc. Maybe they don't have the self-confidence or self-belief in what their product and selling is. I mean, like, if you were going to tackle or help give advice to someone who was struggling with maybe imposter syndrome or lack of self-esteem or lack of self-confidence, what would you initially say? Not necessarily to a guy, but it could be, I imagine it probably is more so because feminine energy normally in most cases has more passive kind of confidence attached to it. And I think for me, especially because I was quite lucky in like where I came out in regards to the market, it was quite a good market, but that isn't necessarily true now. I mean, what advice would you give to business owners, but people in general that are looking to build self-confidence, self-belief, self-understanding, that are coming into maybe a more challenging market or maybe into a market that's not ideal?
The first of all, I would say that we have to question when we hear messages from the media and from various networking groups we're in. We have to question what it means by difficult financial circumstances. We have to question that first. And I would encourage anybody to look around their life and see what's good and what's working and what is already so abundant within their own lives. So I went through bankruptcy about 10 years ago, and it was a very stressful thing to go through. But the thing that helped me enormously was to look around my life and say, hey, I've always had a roof over my head. I've always had food on the table. Life's pretty good. I can build a great basis from here. I'm not on the street. And I think we've sort of been trained to be very entitled to have this sort of perfect, like happy, easy life. And I think the purpose of life is to evolve, and we do that by overcoming obstacles. And so if we're like really buying into this story that financial circumstances are very difficult right now, and I'm not saying that the economy hasn't changed or any of that, but if we're buying into this story about how difficult it is, how does that make us feel? And for instance, it makes us feel stressed. And how are we behaving when we're feeling stressed? And what is the result that is giving us? So that might make us withdraw. It might make us try and cut expenses. Or now I've seen TV adverts where people are talking about maybe you want to have less than 25 pence milk on your breakfast cereal. Now, is that really going to help people change their lives? What I'm not seeing a lot of is a different way of thinking that says, how can I go and make more money? How can I serve people with the gifts and talents that I have that will create more money? And in that creating more money, I can provide extra for this economy. Right? I can go to my local shop and buy more local goods, which is going to help that local business. So I think it comes along with this idea that money's going to run out, which is such nonsense because money just never runs out. It's an endless supply. And so we're sort of fed this myth that we have to hold on to what we have, we have to reduce what we are outputting, rather than saying, let's go and create more, because it's so fun to create more money, because we have to do it from a place of service.
Yeah, and I think, I was having a coaching call this morning with a client, and, we were talking a lot about value more than price or more than cost, right? And I think it's a lot of what you're leaning into there, which is around creating more value within your market. And if you don't necessarily have the value there yet in the market, then it's down to you to help create that demand, right? I don't believe no matter what the economy does, that it's not out of your control. I was having another one-to-one this afternoon, and we were talking about, well, when the economy gets difficult, there's kind of two approaches. One is like a very kind of scarcity, kind of very defensive, very kind of, I'm going to go into my shell and disappear for a bit, which is always a bit concerning when we know as companies do that. Or there's people like us, from what I've seen from both of us, where, right, okay, what are we doing? And now let's double it. Let's double our output. Let's push harder. Because I think, for me, there's kind of two approaches to that. Number one, you're increasing the probability that people are going to know and hear and start to understand what you do and how it's valuable to them. But also number two, you're just increasing the mathematical probability that you're likely to be more successful, because the more content or the more touch points you have out there, the more likelihood that the right person is going to find it. It's simply maths. It's nothing like spiritual and like, oh, it's in the stars. No, it's maths, right? The more you have going out, the better.
Yes, and you can create more output by your belief that people want what you have to offer. People are waiting for you to offer it to them, and you want to help people from a place of love and service. And so that is going to make you behave very differently and output more.
And I think it's about having a mindset of abundance, right? And trusting necessarily that time, if you are patient and you work hard and you are consistent, that it will all work itself out. And it's not necessarily going to be this kind of like, oh, it's all going to come crashing down or all going to come to a standstill. I mean, when you work with people who maybe don't have an abundance mindset or are looking to attract an abundance mindset, is there any like techniques or anything that you specifically use in your role that can really help people, attract that abundance mindset? Because we can speak from quite a fortunate place because we've done the work to attract an abundance mindset, right? But that's not necessarily because we have it. So we're kind of, in some ways, we're sat on our high horse going, oh, well, yes,
well,
you just have an abundance
me,
mindset.
what I would say is that the brain has a natural bias towards a lack mindset. And it has that natural bias because it wants to keep us safe. So the primitive part of our brain still thinks that we live in caves and that resources are limited, right? You've got to get those berries while you can. You've got to keep yourself safe from the saber-toothed tiger. And there's only a limited amount, so you have to get it while you can. What the primitive brain doesn't know is that it's 2023 and we have more than enough resources to keep ourselves alive, right? Our survival needs are very, very good. So first of all, we've got to know that's sort of how the primitive brain behaves. But today we have this amazing prefrontal cortex that has the ability to think about our thinking and to decide what we want to think. So in my experience, practicing an abundant way of thinking is something that I have to do very intentionally every single day, because left to its own devices, the brain will go to, oh, it's not enough, we're going to run out. So I'm working with a client at the moment. She's a spiritual mentor, and she also sells ceramics that she's channeled. She's channeled the energy into these ceramics, so they're tools for meditation and growth. And she came to me with a goal to make more money in her business this year, very specific amount of revenue. And she had a certain amount of money, and she had a lot of anxiety about investing in coaching. Part of her brain knew that the investment in coaching is what would help her to create more money, but she was being held back by a story that her brain was saying, if I spend this money, I'm going to run out. And if I run out of money, and this is how the process went, if I run out of money, I'm going to be destitute. And then I'm going to look awful, and then I'm going to die. This is like catastrophic thinking. And so I took her through a process to bring her back to this sort of positive neutral of helping her brain create safety in a way to say, I have plenty right now. I have plenty right now. I can live right now. And we can only ever have what we have in this very moment. And part of our cultural conditioning is always saying you don't have enough, so it's going to run out. So she was very aware of that thinking. She could see how it was making her feel. And I gave her a new thought to practice. I said, the thought to practice is I'm making money now. And I could see a physical change in her as she repeated that thought back to me. And she's been practicing that thought so that she's now embodying it. And she's already made back 20% of her investment by session 4 of a 48 session package. So she's on a roll. So she's changed that story from one of lack to one of abundance. And at the same time, she does notice from time to time her brain wants to go back to, oh, it's not working, it's not enough. And so I like to use the analogy sometimes of turning a cargo ship round, right? A cargo ship will get great momentum if it's going in one direction. But this is where we get to use our highly evolved prefrontal cortex to kind of lasso this cargo ship and bring it back round and say, hey, brain, I know that you're scared. I know that you're freaking out. And you think everything's going to run out and we're going to get destitute, but look how it's working over here. And there's a section of our brain called the reticular activating system. And it's a very simple kind of basic bit of kit in our brain that just filters the world according to what we think. So if we think thoughts that feel better, if we're thinking thoughts like, I'm making money now, the brain will go to work to show us things that match up to that. And so that's kind of like the technology, if you like, that I use with my clients. It's just literally reprogramming via that filter system to see the world that we want to see. And it's, I think, really audacious work because we have to go against our cultural conditions.
It's something that's really interesting to me because, someone who's been interested in psychology for as long as I can remember, it's always been something that I've kind of knew but never officially studied, right? So I think it's something which, for me, and it kind of comes from it in some ways socially, as we're social creatures. I imagine, I'll be curious to hear your thoughts on this, but it comes from my understanding at least, the concept of if we were, because the way our brain's wired, right, is to be okay in society, to make sure that everyone is going to be like, yes, Colton's a good person. We look after Colton. We like Colton, right? But the reason why we do that is because if we were extradited from the tribe, e.g. the tribe didn't like me, and I was extradited, it's very likely I'm going to get eaten by a saber-tooth tiger, die, freeze, etc. Some other form of death is available, right? But death would be the end, right? Yeah. And there's so much of our society still, in most cases, which is stuck in that context. And I think that, especially, entrepreneurship as a whole is kind of, in some ways, that's the reason why I don't think a lot of people who could be incredible entrepreneurs don't. And I'm not saying that they should necessarily, but I think for me, it's about being in a position where you can say, actually, I do have a dream, I do have a vision, I do want to give this a go. And actually, what's the worst case scenario? What happens if it all goes horribly wrong? What, I have to go and get a job, or etc., or I have to go and take my experience from doing this and climb the corporate ladder again? Now again, it's everyone's context, right? I was very fortunate that I was born knowing what I wanted to do from a very young age, and I was like, well, I'm leaving a dead-end job to potentially create myself a career but the dead end job's still going to exist. So there's actually no leap here, really. But I think how does someone go through that fear or go through that? I get the question that jumps to mind from that is if someone's listening to this and they go, you know what, yeah, Colton's right, but they're terrified of the idea. They're like, that's actually really scary. How does one, I guess in some ways, push themselves to do it outside of just get on with it and do it?
Yeah. So I love to give the analogy of running a marathon. I think a marathon is such a great lesson for life. I am a marathon runner. Not everybody is. I'm not advising anybody to go out and run a marathon. But nobody stands at the start line of a marathon and says, yay, this is going to be really fun and easy. We know it's going to be difficult. And so we figure out what the obstacles are going to be along the way and we strategize to overcome them. Because we know at the end we're going to have the result of having completed 26.2 miles and having that lovely shiny medal. So for someone who might want to become an entrepreneur and is feeling scared, I love to remind everybody that if you have a dream, if you have a desire, that it's like a message from the divine. This is your task in this earth, right, to do. So my dream was to be running a business where I didn't work 40 hours a week. I met clients from all over the world on the internet, and I spent lots of time on the beach and in cafes in the city where I live. This was my dream. And so I left a very well-paid, very groovy career in shoot and film production in London. And I spent 2 years working in a cafe and a restaurant in Brighton on the way to my dream. And I knew that that result was guaranteed because I decided it. So our future is as yet unwritten, as an infinite field of possibilities. And, you know, there are other people who've created what I've created. It's not that far-fetched. And so I knew that my task over the course of 2 years was to overcome the obstacles between me and where I wanted to be. And so I strategized for them along the way. And at each point, I felt a lot of fear throughout it. But I knew that overcoming that fear, I could either stay where I was and be frightened, or overcome the fear and walk through the fear, allow it, and become the next version of myself. So we're going to feel fear either way. And it doesn't mean anything's gone wrong. It's a very normal part of being human. And I think that's sometimes where we allow ourselves to stop and stall and quit and get stuck is because we think we shouldn't feel afraid. We think things shouldn't be difficult. And we also think that when we get to our goal, life will be perfect. And it just never is. Our brain still has, because being a human being involves half feeling amazing and wonderful and in love and fulfilled, and it also involves feeling scared and anxious and terrified and like we're going to run out of money. And nothing's gone wrong that we feel that. And so I see a lot of people who might be experiencing negative emotion, and I put negative in inverted commas because I don't think really there's negative or positive emotion. There's just emotion. It's energy and motion that moves through our body. I see a lot of people having negative emotion about their negative emotion. So they're having suffering about their suffering. And that will really slow us down. So quite often, quite a large part of the work I do with my clients as well is helping them allow their difficult emotions, allow there are some things we want to feel bad about. And that's okay. We don't want to feel happy about everything.
It reminds me of a conversation I had a while ago with a very long-term friend of mine that was about I don't want to undo the bad situations or the mental health issues or blah, 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 because it gives me the context to know what the good is, right? Because otherwise you don't, what's good then? You have nothing to compare it against. You have no contrast, right? So I think for me, and it's why I really relate to what you were talking about, because there's a positive spiral that goes upwards and there's a negative spiral that goes downwards, right? So I'm always very aware of my mindset, and I try to be very careful if I notice that I have a negative mindset. And when I work with some clients around this as well, I'm sure you do in the same way, it's about controlling your mind and about in some ways understanding, okay, what in this reality that I feel negative about can I actually control? What are you stressed about? What are you worried about? What are you concerned about? I'll use the pandemic as an example. People were saying to me during that period, oh, I'm worried about my business, I'm worried about this, I'm worried about that. I said, okay, well, all of that's understandable and all of that we appreciate is concerning. However, what of those things can you actually change? You tangibly change? The answer was none. Okay, so what benefit comes from me faffing around, having a panic attack, being really worried, really anxious, etc.? Instead, what I can do is I can say, right, I've been gifted with this amount of time. I've been gifted with these opportunities to create a solution within the confines of my house or within the confines of the rules or within etc. How can I use this opportunity that I've been given to grow so that when these limitations are removed, which they will in time, it's just natural, we couldn't be in that world forever. Yeah. How can I become out of that storm or become someone different during that storm? And it's the same when you go through anything, whether that's, unfortunately someone dying or heartbreak or, you got fired, you got made redundant, etc. Insert other unfortunate negative life reality here. But I think it's about how you twist your mindset and about how you create that perspective. I mean, from your perspective as a coach, when you coach people, do you find that's a struggle that a lot of people have? And if so, how do you help them reframe the reality that they find themselves in?
Yeah, so at the very beginning of the pandemic, that's when I set my business up. And that was when I had planned to set my business up. So suddenly I was at my 2-year time. I was like, oh, apparently we're setting up a business now. And a lot of people around me were kind of running around with their hair on fire going, help, I don't know what to do. My life is over. My job is over. My career's over. And I had created a course. It was an hour-long workshop that I'd presented in some lunchtimes in Brighton. And I divided it into 4 parts. And I said to people, come for half an hour a day for 4 days, and I'll take you through a process that will help you make some new decisions. And what they all came out with was this understanding that they had the ability and the agency to make decisions about what they wanted. They knew there were certain things that they couldn't control. They couldn't control the fact that they had to stay home, that they were put on furlough from their jobs. But the process I took them through allowed them to access their creativity and come up with ideas and decisions and plans that they might never have thought of before. I caught up with a client last week, and he told me from that course he decided that he wanted to go into theatre. And as soon as lockdown was ended, he went to Berlin. There was an opportunity there. And then he went to Cairo, and he spent about 1.5 years working there. And now he was working on a film in Canterbury. And he was so thrilled and fascinated to see how he'd started lockdown thinking, my goodness, I don't know what to do. And suddenly this world of possibility opened up to him. And just because he was brave enough to say to himself, there's something different for me here. This feeling of impotence and this thought that I can't do anything different, that I'm stuck at home, is not acceptable to me, and I want to take charge of my life. So he developed this whole new story about what was possible for him. And I heard a quote recently from someone that said, human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're finished products. And, if we get to our goal and we think we're done, and then we don't feel fulfilled or satisfied, it's because we're not actually done. There's more for us. And we can always ask more of ourselves and stretch ourselves. But that does come with learning to feel discomfort and learning to overcome obstacles. And having faith in the idea of anything is possible. Absolutely anything is possible. And your future could be beyond your wildest imagination.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things that jump to mind that were all quotes, actually, ironically, but the crux and the threads that were all between them were, if you work the system and then you remove your emotional attachment to the outcome, you'll actually get hugely further in a year than you thought you would, but actually in a week you're probably not going to be as far as you think. So, and it comes from the art of compounding, right? Because as you continually work hard and as you continually develop and you continually grow, it's one of these things where it will combine on itself and then combine on itself and then combine on itself. But the crux, I think sometimes people misunderstand, they don't actually understand. It's like a snowball going down a hill, right? We call it the snowball effect for a reason. But I think so many people don't want to take that initial step into pushing the snowball, right? Because that's scary, that's concerning, etc. And I think that, I could sit here and list quotes forever, but there's no value there. The value, I think, from a lot of those quotes is the only place you should feel comfortable is in the discomfort and the uncomfortableness of pushing yourself. And from what I know from my own growth story, and I'm sure you would agree, the only time we actually feel really alive, truly, is when we're pursuing that goal. It's actually not achieving the goal. We get a lot of dopamine and we get a lot of kind of like feel good feelings when we achieve it, but that's momentary. That in that moment is, yes, I won. But then your brain instantly just goes, okay, well, why can't I do, let's say it was I hit 10K, right? Big milestone for a lot of businesses. Fantastic. Right, cool. What if I could do 100K? No, you hit 100K. What if I could do 1 million? Right, and then you keep going, right? It's why I think in some ways the wealth disparity exists, because the people who are constantly focusing on growth, they don't think about the revenue targets in the same way. They're just check marks to go, yeah, actually I am moving in this direction.
Well, the way I use goals and the way I help my clients to use goals is the goal is just an indicator of where we're going. The purpose of having a goal is not just to achieve it, it's to who can we become in the achieving of that goal. Because we have to become someone new, right? If we have a goal of making 100K in our business and we're currently making 10K, we have to become the person who's making 100K. And one of the biggest things that holds people back from moving towards their dreams and their goals and their desires is a story they're telling themselves about what other people will think of them and what people will in their past will think about them. And so that's something that we always address as well. And that's something for your listeners to think about, what is a story you're telling yourself about people in your past and what they think about you? Because going through that process of creating a goal requires a shift in your identity. It requires an upgrade in your self-concept. And that comes with the thrill and excitement of becoming a new person, right? And that's something that's happening naturally all the time. Like, you're not the same person you were when you were 15 or when you were 5 years old. But it also can come with some grief, right? Because we built up this story about who we are. We have it confirmed by the people in our lives, so we think, right? And we're being required to let that go so that we can create this new experience over here. So there is that tension. Are we willing to let everything go so that we can become this new version of ourselves? And I think that's like the real growth edge for anybody who wants to create extraordinary.
Yeah, and I think, what jumped to mind is kind of leading on to, in some ways, I think the definition of insanity, right, is doing the same thing repeatedly and trying to get a different result. So if you want a different result, you have to do stuff you've never done before. But the thing that leads on to that is kind of the social concept that happens when we are growing, right? Because you, unfortunately, are going to outgrow probably a significant amount of the people who are close to you and who are in this period. And it kind of comes from, I guess, I could quote a lot, but I'll use the quote of not everyone is, people are meant to be in your life for a season, quote unquote. I mean, have you had clients that find that who have a lot of negative connotation to that, or they have a lot of concern, anxious?
Well, I can
about
give
that?
an example from my own life. So 10 years ago, I stopped smoking and then I stopped drinking. And a lot of my social life was involved around going to the pub and getting sloshed on a Friday night. And when I decided to stop drinking, but more than smoking actually, it meant staying away from the pub. Because actually 10 years ago, there weren't a great deal of non-alcoholic choices in the pub. There was maybe one non-alcoholic beer. And that meant saying no to going out with certain people in the evenings. So the thoughts I had to deal with were, I'm going to lose all my friends. Nobody's going to like me anymore. And actually, what I found was that I ended up having more friends, and that the people around me who were drinking and who were in pubs, we just, our lives weren't aligned anymore. And it wasn't difficult to let go of those friendships. It wasn't painful because I found myself involved in new activities. And I have seen that in my clients as well. That sometimes the people around them who are doing all the similar sort of things to what they're doing, they also change as they go along as well. Sometimes it makes us a leader. Lots of my friends started stop drinking after I stopped drinking because they could see the impact of it on my life. So I did also cultivate thoughts that I was leading here, and I was pioneering something. So I really encourage my clients to do that. See themselves as pioneers and leaders in whatever new choices they're making in their life. And we're not taught that, right? We're taught that if we make different choices from everybody, we're going to be separated from the tribe and die. Instead, how about we think, oh, I'm really a pioneer here, and I'm setting an example for people that they are going to want.
Yeah, and I think it reminds me of someone, a couple of people said to me actually that, people look up to you, Colin, right? People use you as like a yardstick, or they use you as like someone they can look up to see what's possible. And initially when they said that to me, my reaction was shit, right? Which was like, right, okay. But now it's kind of an honor, and it's something I'm really proud of. And it's like, actually, it's become a driving factor for me, because it's like, yeah, actually, that's an honor. That's something I have a privilege to be able to say that's possible. And it's not something that I take for granted, I would hope, right? And I think it was what reminded you about your drinking analogy. It's like, actually, let's be the example for what's possible. If you have a dream and have a goal and have an ambition and you have a drive to be like, yeah, I am going to push forward. Yeah, I am going to actually be able to do this. Is it going to be easy? No, absolutely not. Is there going to be stages where I think I'm going to lose it all? Absolutely. But that's all part of it. And it's about, I think, being able to hold yourself in that calm and understand that actually it is going to be okay and everything will actually be fine if you give it enough patience and enough time. But I think as a potentially, I think I'm conscious of time, so I think let's wrap up soon. But I think as a final point of principle, and the reason why I'm doing a lot of internal work at the moment around like my own clarity and my own calm, is like, no matter what the storm is, you aren't necessarily like, you'll be the same person when you come out of it unless you choose to change, right, and adapt. And I think, from as humans as a whole, we're designed to evolve, right? But I think so many people, because evolution is painful, right? Because you're quite literally, you're changing who you are. But I think that it's necessary if you're going to commit to growth. And the thing is, one of the first things I ever read was between the fixed growth and growth mindset and fixed mindset, right? And I think for me, once you go down this kind of rabbit hole of self-development or personal development, it's not that you get hooked on it. It just becomes this, like, you're able to see through things. You're able to understand a lot more of how the world operates. Simple things like, how does money work? Simple things like, how does mindset work? How does, like, even stuff that's really tangible to business, like marketing and sales. Okay, how does that actually tangibly work? And let's be honest, it's all a negotiation. It's all a conversation with another human being. So that's what everyone is after, or we live in an attention economy. So it's all around creating attention to say, hey, I create this really cool thing. Are you interested in this really cool thing? But I think that the question that comes from that, I guess in some ways, is how do we, because as we said before, tribally we're hardwired to not want to be the center of attention, not want to be that person at the front of a room, not want to be that person on video. How do we, I guess in some ways, calm ourselves or bring us to a point where this is okay, right? Me being on this podcast, I have guests sometimes, not with yourself, but I have guests sometimes who are like, I'll be honest with you, Colin, before the show, they're like, I'm really nervous. I won't name them for obvious reasons, but like, I'm really nervous about this idea. I really want to do it, and I think it's a great idea, but this is terrifying.
So the way that I've overcome that is by really living into the idea that I have a duty to show up and show people what's possible for them. And I think that's all that marketing is. Marketing is showing people what's possible for them. And so if me sharing my story and me sharing my client results, and that's applicable to any industry, right? Not just me as a coach. It's a really nice example for me as a coach. It's very easy for me to do. But me sharing that story, those stories, helps other people see what's possible for them too. And I feel that I have a responsibility and a duty to do that, because I hear so many people telling me that they're stuck. And that's an indicator to me that they've achieved everything that society told them they should achieve, right? They've got the qualifications and the car and the house and the relationship and the kids, and it still doesn't feel fulfilling to them. And I really want people to know, if you feel stuck, that's because there is more for you, and you are allowed to go and do that. And it's the most thrilling journey to go and do that. And you will grow as a human being, because in order to do that, you have to build a relationship with yourself of deep self-trust, of faith in, you working with yourself and some force greater than you, and knowing that nothing can go wrong. Like, it's all part of a learning experience. And that is something that just thrills me, to show people that they can grow, that they can create whatever they want, and there are no rules.
And I really agree. And I think there's, I think it comes back to the mindset I've had for a long time, and the terminology I've used for a long time, which is there's either success or learning. There's no such thing as failure. Failure doesn't exist, because it's meant to be a lesson for you that you can use to grow, and you can adapt, and you can use to evolve, or you've achieved what you wanted to achieve. You made the money, you got the girl, you got the guy, whatever, etc. And it's one of those things where I think as we progress and as we gain more life experience, and as someone who's still youthful, quote unquote, I've still got huge amounts to learn. But also I think one of the, I guess in some ways, the Achilles heels of business owners that sometimes can actually cause them to go under, is that they get too arrogant. They think they know it all. They think they're too high and mighty to fail, etc. I mean, just as a final thought, how do you, I guess in some ways, undo that? Because I think it's quite core. I think we need a level of ego, because otherwise, we don't have anything to strive for and win for, right? But also, if we let it go too far the other way, then we're going to be in that arrogant territory. We're going to be in that kind of I'm too big to fail, I can't fail, that kind of thing. So how do we make sure that it stays balanced?
I like to cultivate a beginner's mindset, and that there's always more for me to learn. And I mean, just the tool that I teach my clients, it's a remarkable tool that on the one hand is very basic. There are 5 steps to it. If I go through those steps, I'm gonna learn the lesson. But that tool can be used in so many different ways. And if I think for a second that I've nailed it in day one, then I'm not going to access my creativity to use that, to leverage it to even more advantage. So yeah, a beginner's attitude, a beginner's mindset is not the same as denying my knowledge and expertise and experience, but it's coming at things, at life and at business, with curiosity. And it's always asking, what can I learn today? How can I make today amazing? How can I serve? And it's asking myself questions like that keeps me in that beginner's energy.
I think it also opens you up to the opportunity to take guidance and input and opportunities to learn from anyone, right? You're not in this box of I only learn from a teacher, or I only learn from this, because I fully believe that everyone that you meet in your life, you're meant to meet for a reason at the time you're meant to meet them, so on. But also they're meant to teach you the lessons and then potentially disappear. For that, when you've learned the lessons you need to from them, they're meant to disappear. And that doesn't mean they're never going to come back. That doesn't mean they're never going to be part of your life again. But for that period, or that season, so to speak, they taught you what you needed to know. And now it's your job to move on and move past and push forward so that if you're meant to come back together, you will, and if you're not, then you're not. I think it's one of those. But and this is true in personal and in business and etc. But I think everyone has their own personal journey, which just so happens to be at the moment me and Jo are connected on that journey because we're here having this conversation. But that doesn't mean necessarily that me and Jo will continue to be connected for the foreseeable future. And something which I have been aware of, but also I tell clients, and also I've said to friends of mine who are starting businesses, it's like, look, you may love the clients you're working with, you may love those people as people, but if you want to grow, you have to be okay with letting every single one go in the respect of not working with them anymore.
It's not just the clients who you work with in your business. You also, if you want to create a new result in your life, you have to be willing to let go of everything you currently have, even if it's good.
Yeah, and that could be a house, a location, an office, camera, a person, etc. Everything. Because I think once you, and that's why doing the internal work and working on you is so important, because the one person that will stay consistent for your entire life, for every day, is going to be you. Bad, good, indifferent, every day will be you. You'll be unfortunately you're stuck with yourself, right? So let's make sure it's someone that you enjoy actually.
So what a great reason to
quality
cultivate
time
a relationship with yourself.
Absolutely, and invest in percentages of final thought for the audience. But something that I mentioned to the coaching client this morning was, you make sure that you are the person you invest the most in, because wrongly or rightly, you're stuck with yourself for the rest of your life.
And also, when you invest in yourself, if you, let's say, for example, I teach my client to make £10,000, that's a skill they've got for the rest of their life that they can replicate again and again and again.
I mean, for those who really enjoyed the conversation, interested in your program, interested in working with you, where can people really connect with what you do, see more of your content, etc.? Where's best for people to reach out to do that?
The best place for people to come and find me is on Instagram. I'm Jo_Renshaw. Yeah, that's where I share most of my content. I also have an amazing newsletter, which I share once, maybe twice a week, with longer form stories. It might be a story from my own life that's teaching an example of something that can be overcome, or stories about my clients. So yeah, and that is at Jo Renshaw.
And any final thoughts, final messages that you want to leave?
Yeah, I think final thoughts would be to say, if you feel stuck, just know that there is something much bigger waiting for you. And the way to find out what that is to decide what you want it to be and allow it to feel uncomfortable and go for it.
Thank you for joining me, ladies and gents. I hope you took value from this episode. If you did, I'd love to hear what you think in the comment section down below. And want to be subscribed to the channel if you're new and you don't want to miss next week's exciting guest interview where we're going to be talking about something else entirely. Haven't even filmed it yet, so I'm not sure what it is. But thank you so much for coming back once again, and I'll see you very